Welcome to Firing Line with William F. Buckley Jr.
Dr. Fauci, you seem not to answer Fauci. You had made the observation, most famously in your interview with the Boston Globe, that it is entirely possible that while there is broad consensus that the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic had emerged from a bat coronavirus, specifically a horseshoe bat, with regard to the intermediary host, however, that had caused the pandemic, we may never know. Truly, a deeply concerning thought for some, but a prospect that carries many varied meanings for those who could conceivably imagine those varying scenarios that might stem from that thought. I am quite certain that you agree.
Why, certainly, Bill.
Indeed, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci. However, continue along this method of analysis that we had begun earlier, pursuing an alternative analysis to the crisis. It would appear that the logical inquiry would follow the approach of beginning that analysis at the starting point, or in Aristotelian logic, the first causes, and then attempting to reconstruct the path from that point of the virus would have taken from that location in Yunnan amongst horseshoe bats, specifically Rhinopolis finis, to its final destination in Wuhan. There may be some confusion in terms of horseshoe bats, that they're all the same. Actually quite not. Whereas both George Zhao, the former director of the Beijing equivalent to the CDC, as well as Dr. Warby, your colleague, have suggested that not just one strain, but two lineage strains had somehow simultaneously arrived in Wuhan between November and December 2019, a lineage B, most associated with the wet market, great popularity, with which some 19 of 27 cases, only 19 of 27 cases, have been associated by December 31st, 2019, in a venue the size of 9 American football fields in a city of 11 million, not small, when the Chinese health officials had, at that point, raised an alarm about a disease that they did not know at that point was infectious at all, from which there were no fatalities at all. In addition to a lineage A, the very first reported cases with which patients appear to have had no connection at all to the wet market, giving rise to some level of confusion and also perhaps spurring associations with the laboratory also there in Wuhan, but with which also they had no direct connection. The first case was a businessman who had traveled to Wuhan and had been infected while staying at a hotel.
That would be correct, Bill. Lineage B, whereas Dr. Warby, in his analysis, developed also by Dr. Anderson, had reported the apparent preponderance of hospitalized COVID-19 cases were associated there.
Hospitalized cases indeed, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Anthony Fauci. And these hospital cases, as you have referenced, often associated with the most severe cases of infection, most of which we would have more priority in triage. Well, even during the outbreak in China, the investigators from WHO had noted that, and I'm quoting now from their February 2020 40-page report that most apparently had never read. Most people infected with COVID-19 virus have, or then had, rather, mild disease and had recovered. In about 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists, examining 19 times more cases in China, 55,924 that had been reported by February 2020, February 20th, 2020, than had yet been reported in the entire United States by mid-March. And rather robust analysis on the very front end. And they had reported, and again I quote, approximately 80% of laboratory-confirmed patients have had mild to moderate disease, which includes non-pneumonia and pneumonia cases, very mild. But some 13.8% had severe disease, starting to get into that danger zone, and 6.1%, about half of that, were found to be critical, including respiratory failure, septic shock, and multiple organ dysfunction failure, indications of a transition from an upper respiratory tract infection down to a lower respiratory tract infection.
Yes, Bill, but the investigators in China had also noted that, and I quote, touche. Indeed.
Now you are imitating me.
Yes, all in jest. But the WHO, returning to the point, had reported, and I think that this is a very significant point, that asymptomatic infection had been reported, but the majority of the relatively rare cases who are asymptomatic on the date of identification and infection of infection report went on to develop disease. And this is something important. And they had also stressed at that point in the emerging crisis that the proportion of truly asymptomatic infections is unclear.
Yeah, it's not about it. And that is a point that, at least I believe, from anecdotal observation, has been a point of rather wide confusion, especially amongst those who are not clinicians or epidemiologists or experts like yourself, and to quite a tragic degree, I might add.
And now, Bill, you are imitating me.
That was not my intention, of course. But the point that I had wanted to make clear was that there is quite a defined distinction to a medical professional, at least, between symptomatic presentations of illness, which require some diagnostic technique or analysis to discern, such as fever or pain or elevated or reduced blood pressure, these asymptomatic signs of infection, which can be readily observed even by a layman. And in China, the investigators did state very clearly that at the source of the outbreak, that asymptomatic spread, i.e. coughing or sneezing or even runny nose, appears to be relatively rare and does not appear to be a major driver of transmission.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.